It's beautiful. But even from this angle where the nose just dominates, it definitely looks like Snoopy.
It totally does.
Which I don't know if it was designed that way. I mean, Charles Schulz was a, beloved of the program, and we have these awards called Snoopy Awards.
Oh, I didn't know, right, because of the cap.
Yeah, well, and it is this award. It is the Astronaut's Award. It is not given out because it's somebody's turn. It is like not just the extra mile, but the extra marathon.
Oh.
And it's an actual pin, and it flies on a shuttle. And when it's presented in person by an astronaut, where you walk in, somebody doesn't even know. And you walk in usually with their family and you change their day because it's and you read this thing, it's an official letter, and you add stuff that you want to add. And
those are the encomiums that really hit, right?
It's really very special.
I have to say, every time I walk into this building and see this from here, I get a little bit choked up. And I'm still unpacking why. Part of it is because you can see how hand-built it is. Part of it is that I can't believe how small it is and yet how gigantic at the same time.
Well, I see all the individual tiles. I mean, there's a person that knows like that area of the shuttle. I mean, it's an amazing jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
And it's different on different shuttles, the pattern and everything. And you just realize that there's all these different parts of this vehicle, and they're all designed for a specific reason, and it all comes together with launching and coming home.
When I got to fly in the U-2 spy plane.
Oh, you did?
I did. It was pretty awesome.
Okay. I'm not talking anymore until you say I can go.
So one of the things I thought about up there was I am sitting in the knife point of hundreds of thousands of person hours of labor. And this is that times 20, times 100.
Times
Yeah.
so many. I think like we as astronauts do not actually get to be, generally, unless you have a certain job, right?
Yeah.
We do not see the actual shuttle very often.
Fascinating. That never occurred to me.
I mean, so we train in Houston on lots of different kinds of simulators, and then we will go to the Cape. If you're assigned to a mission, you'll go maybe to check out that piece of hardware.
Yeah.
For example, the Chandra telescope, in the payload bay, understanding how that's going to be configured, or as the person who's going to close the doors.
The stuff that intersects with your mission.
Exactly. You're going to go and see that stuff, or maybe it's something kind of not boring, but some piece of equipment is installed. If you're going to have to open up a cover and then go, oh, that's surprising. I mean, we want to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So we get to be there, and it's all about, like, you have to tape everything, every ring, and no earrings, of course.
Right.
I mean, everything has to be in a pocket so that you don't drop something on the shuttle. It's all about keeping the shuttle hardware safe.
But so before you fly on the shuttle, you've seen the shuttle's exteriors far more after your flights than before?
I would say yes.
Wow.
For me, I was really lucky. I was down here for a launch when I was in the Air Force, and they were going to go up and collect the long duration exposure facility, this big school bus size thing.
Yeah.
And they're going to go pick it up, all these different materials on it, and bring it back. I'm a material scientist. So at a bar, I met a woman engineer.
This is a great beginning to the story.
That's going to happen these days. And she said, you have all the clearances. If it launches tomorrow, do you want to come and see the shuttle? And I'm like, yes, I would really like that. And she met me at the door, and we walked into this building, and I'm like, and you're looking, because I mean, it's there, but
it's big.
But it's raised up. And then you realize that there's probably shielding around the gear and everything.
Right.
And so this building is really tall, and so to see it, you actually almost have to be looking down from above, because when you're below, you're like, okay, there's a ceiling here. It's kind of weird, but and that is the shuttle.
And it's standing upright at that point, right?
No. It's like this in the orbiter processing facility. The
Fascinating.
OPF. And it's just that it's raised up. It's actually slung up there and on stands. And so when you walk in, you actually don't, I mean, it's almost like you were a floor below this floor.
Right.
And you're like, where is it?
Do you have an emotional response to seeing them in person?
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a special thing to leave the planet. And this is the way we've gotten to do it for a really long time.
Yeah.
And we learned so much. And yet, I think all of us who are astronauts and people who are flight controllers, we all tell stories about, what we do up there and how it works and why. And in that, I think the actual magic of the hardware gets a little lost. And so when I walk into a museum and
Get to just have that.
it's, I could stand here forever.
I want to talk about how you get in and out of this building.
The hatch. I mean, so when I think about the hatch,
Yeah.
I usually don't see it like this, right? Because if we've just landed, then there's a whole sort of, we call it the Astrovan. It looks like an Airstream trailer, but on big, scissors, right?
Oh, right,
Yeah.
because it can
Yep.
come up and meet
Exactly.
you. Oh, right. So it meets you when you crawl
so we
into
seldom
it.
see the hatch.
Oh,
and so
right.
when and now if you think of this shuttle, up on the launch pad, and now we are going along a little gangplank and
Right.
out to the White Room, which, if the shuttle is there, ends at this hatch. So we don't actually, and the hatch is actually open.
And you enter this room in one orientation and you leave it in a totally different orientation.
That's a very good point. And we actually get used to doing that. In Houston, it seems like it makes sense. It looks like an airplane, but then when you turn this on its back like this, and then you climb in, so we do that with one of our simulators, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you climb in, everything is wrong. I mean, the windows in the back are there, and the nose is up, and it's really disorienting. So we climb, and so here, I never see the hatch. That's why I love this, but we crawl in, and there's no graceful way to crawl into a space shuttle. I mean, it's like, you're like this, and
And you're wearing the
scooching,
ACES, you've got a harness and all that stuff on.
Yep, exactly. This is after the flight crew equipment folks actually put that harness on, and there's a lot of pulling and tugging, and I mean, to make everything be in the right place, and then they kind of shake you, but they do it off camera because it just looks bad, right? To make sure that's all in the right place.
What about getting back out? What is it like to re-enter Earth's gravity well and crawl out of this thing when you've been weightless for however long you've been up there?
You know how when you get off of a boat ship, there'll be this unconscious little thing that your body is doing, and it seems like things are kind of moving. But I remember from my first launch that it was like going,
wow,
it's huge.
Wow.
And people help you and make sure you don't fall over. And in fact, we do that, we get out and we feel we feel fine usually, but it's a little bit, it's just hard on your vestibular system.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very confusing. I mean, just the touch of a finger sends you somewhere in space, and then when you're actually walking, it's like, it's huge. And so by the time it gets better, and then we actually hopefully get to walk around the shuttle after landing. And everybody wants to do that, and at the same time, sometimes you do medical tests where they want you to not have walked around the shuttle.
Right.
Luckily, I did get to walk around, but there is a certain unsteadiness, and there's a lot of the NASA administrators there, different people, and you'd be shaking hands, and I was definitely I was hanging.
Right. You're using them for support. I'm curious, you went up twice.
I did on the shuttle. Yep.
Yes. I'm curious if on the second time there were things you thought would be easier that weren't.
I am somebody who does not feel well after landing. About an hour after landing, but it turns out modern science and medicine have, chemistry and drugs that really help that.
So they figured out your chemistry on the
Exactly.
first flight.
But what I find fascinating is that, the second time I went to space, and I think other people will say this too, is you get up there and your body goes, oh, I'm here. I'm here in this place again. I know how the rules are. I know how this works, and here I am. I'm here. And then you get back, and you know that you're back on Earth, and that if you let go of something,
it goes away.
It's still surprising, in a visceral way. I mean, intellectually you know, but in a visceral way, you're like, oh. I mean, there's a lot of putting on your watch, and your watch will fall. You're like, how does that happen?
I'm reminded of those videos Chris Hadfield did after he came back of just pouring cereal and commenting on it as if that was interesting.
It's just the little things, but
when I look at the texture of all these blankets, I mean, it's almost like if you'd asked me to design and build this for a movie, I would never have put so much calico kind of what looked like random detail.
Well, every piece has got a designation, and also we evolved over time, and we built a few of these.
Right.
From the very first one, that Columbia was the heaviest and had the most intricate pattern on it, and then evolved over time to understand how to do things a little more efficiently. But still, every single one of them, they're covering different things that might need more or less thermal protection. I actually worked on tile repair.
Oh wow!
And after Columbia, after we lost Columbia. and working with the people who understood how to install these tiles and what the tiles were like and what they would be like if you had some damage, where it's now on this, it's smooth here, and you're never allowed to touch them. By the way, do not.
Oh wow!
Even when they're not looking, do not do that.
Oh, fascinating.
People are always looking. But then it's really rough on the inside, and it's also very friable. They're not very strong. And so when you're trying to put maybe some goo on the top of that would give it thermal protection, it's like icing a cake. It goes fine, that first little pass with the knife. And then once you do anything at all, it's going to like peel up. So we worked with the people who really understood the tiles in the bottom of the shuttle, and goo engineers, and also how to do a spacewalk. I mean, we're looking at it here as the bottom of the shuttle, but if you were going out on a spacewalk, coming out, this would be like looking over a cliff. Because there are no handholds. There's nothing to hold.
Oh my gosh, there's not like the ISS. Wow.
Exactly. So when Steve Robinson went out to repair something on the bottom of the shuttle, he was on the robotic arm and approaching, but with the arm. But there's places you can't get to with the arm.
Wow. Can we go around the back?
Sure.
Let's go look at the engines.
Do you know that Canada made the robotic arm?
I know that whenever you bring up the space shuttle in Canada, every Canadian has a kind of pride Tourette's where they go, Canada arm! They just say that naturally. You say space shuttle and Canadian says Canada arm.
As a former chief of robotics, it is a marvelous arm. It is so wonderful, actually. I mean, the way it walks around the station and, picks up things out of the shuttle, sticks them on the space station.
That's really cool. So this is the part, I built this model when I was a kid.
Did you?
I handled these nacelles. They're like this big.
Was that just last week, the whole big?
No. Sure, that too. But I love that, like, it's 1-to-1. The model that I built looks exactly like that.
Well, this is like, I mean, we don't get there without these. These are the 3 engines. They use the gas in that big orange tank.
Right.
And liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. And we don't get there without these big ones. And then once we get up to space, the smaller ones are the ones that make our orbit. I mean, they're still pretty big.
They're the maneuvering.
Right. And then there's the tiny ones you see around that are going to help us maneuver as if we're docking with the Hubble Space Telescope or with the space station.
So there's 3 tiers.
Correct.
Wow.
Yep. There's the main engines, which are used only for launch. And once we got up there for launch, they're done.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And the ribs around them, that's all for cooling them, is that right?
So if you look inside, it's almost like, it looks like cardboard where it has these ridges.
Yeah.
But those ridges are all little bitty pipes.
Wow.
And what happens is we don't want to put cold fuel from the tank on the hot engine. So we actually warm up the fuel in those little tubes. They're going zipping, zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. And by the time it then goes to the engine, it's warmed up. And actually on the STS-93, we actually had something happen where when oxygen comes out, it's actually like in the engine, it's like a shower head.
Yeah.
And they put little gold pins into some of the outside ones that have had a lot of use on the engine, just as the least structurally sound part, right?
Yeah.
And on our mission, one of those little gold pins shot out and actually made a ding in one of these little zigzag corrugated places, and we had a hydrogen leak.
Oh my God.
In our engine.
Oh. Did you have to fix that?
Oh no.
Oh wow.
I mean, so first of all, we only need those engines for the way up, right? And this is in that first 8.5 minutes of flight. And the only reason we actually even knew about it was they said, Houston, Columbia, we've got a low-level cut. Or maybe they said, Columbia, Houston. Columbia, Houston, we've got a low-level cut, which means they cut off before we got to our expected orbit, which turned out to be a good enough orbit to still launch the Chandra telescope. But it was a huge, amazing.
So it doesn't matter how much planning you do, no plan survives first contact with implementation.
That's why we are the what if people. What if this happens? What if this happens? We also actually on that same mission, this was Eileen Collins was the first woman commander of the space shuttle. This was Eileen's mission, and 6 seconds after liftoff, we had an electrical short. And it took out 2 of our 6 main engine controllers.
Oh my gosh.
And my first thought, I was sitting down on the mid-deck, and my first thought was, we know how to do that. We just did that in the simulator just last week.
Right.
Because that's the way NASA thinks. What if this happens? But it still means that you have a certain sense of relief when you hear all the right switches being pushed and pulled and reconfigured and all those kinds of things. And we have a way to sort of follow launch. Where what if this happens? What if this happens? What's the next safe place we can get to?
Right.
And and we can turn around and come home, which is not actually an easy thing to do. So we're passing those boundaries. Okay, we're not going back home. We're still doing okay. Yeah. And then aborting to orbit sounds like a bad title, but it's a really good result because orbit is a place where you have time to fix things. But looking like, okay, we got that one, and so it was a different way of watching or following along the launch than on my first mission, where with 5 rookies and 2 experienced people, we were like so excited to be going to space.
You just all like.
We were. There was some hooting and hollering. Yeah.
That's really delightful. I'm glad to hear there's hooting and hollering, because I would be hooting and hollering.
The commander did say, settle down. Yeah.
I love the fact that, like, knowing the structure of airplanes, that these are ailerons, but they really look like somebody's deck. Right? These are pieces of architecture, not pieces of flight hardware to me. They're gigantic.
And it weighs, what, 200,000 pounds, the shuttle.
The whole thing?
Yeah. Wow. So landing, 200,000 pounds. And in fact, we flew with the Chandra X-ray Observatory. It was the largest and the heaviest thing that we'd ever taken to space. And so thinking about landing again, and one thing is that the telescope was calibrated.
Oh, if you hadn't launched the telescope.
Right. If you had to land, if something happened and you had to land with the telescope was calibrated in pieces and then assembled. And so this was and plus such a heavyweight landing was a big deal. So Eileen did a lot of training on heavyweight landings. But when we did land, I love seeing the gear right here, where the space shuttle, if you look at it, we were coming down a really steep glide slope, like 7 times a normal airplane.
I was wondering what the glide ratio is. It's got to be terrible.
Like when we're practicing as a mission specialist, I'm sitting behind the pilot or commander who's practicing in the shuttle training airplane, and I have like a fist on each seat, like of the pilot and the co-pilot, and I am actually doing like a push-up. Like if you let go, you'd be, because there's no flight attendant to tell you to sit down. so you're allowed to be there, right? Yeah. But it's really steep. But then we pull out, and then we're right over the runway. We're going like 300 knots, and that's when the main gear touchdown. And then after that, we say derotate, because once your main gear's on the ground, now you're going to rotate the nose down, right?
Right.
And I heard that command of derotate, and my first thought was, we're not even on the ground yet, because Eileen made such a beautiful true statement. Yeah.
That's beautiful, because these wheels do not look big enough for this.
I know.
Like
so you better make a good one, right?
Yes. When I look at a Hornet, their their landing gear looks appropriate for the size. I was like, those tires look way too small.
They're pretty hefty.
I find this.
It's a beautiful machine.
It really is.
So much of the business happens back here. For launch, there's the 3 engines, but then for landing, these surfaces, at first you're up in space, and that's actually when your jets are firing. When you're way up in space, the jets are actually helping you maneuver, right? And then until you get enough air for these surfaces to actually become enough, like when they move, that they're actually going to change your path.
And you'll start to feel it coming on.
Exactly.
When you're activating the jets from inside, when you're in the middeck, can you hear the hardware activating the jets?
You can hear. You're not probably hearing the ones back here, but you're hearing the ones in the nose.
Right.
Yep. And actually seeing it out in space too. There's little. And it's pretty. It makes me feel like the spaceship is alive.
Oh, I want to talk about the payload doors. You were talking about how you guys had to train. I didn't even know this. To train to shut the payload doors.
And so, on one level, we're learning how to do it from inside the cabin and make sure that we're really watching all the indications. And what's such a big deal about the doors is that as soon as we get up to space, within a couple hours, if we don't have those doors open, we have a huge cooling problem.
Because they're gathering so much heat from the sun.
Exactly. So, not so much that, but all the computers up in the front, all the old computers, right, are running, all that equipment runs hot. And the way it gets cooled is we have Freon loops in the doors.
No, that's your air conditioning unit.
Exactly. And so, that cold fluid. And so if we don't open the doors, we can't release that heat into space.
And it gets problematic very quickly.
We will be landing within a few hours.
Wow.
It's a really big deal. And but then when you're coming home, it's really important to close those doors and know that you're not going to have any hot gases, getting into the shuttle on your way home. And so if you try to close them and it doesn't work, you can usually figure out what's going on And there is a case where, two cases, one where those doors close, but they don't quite latch, and we can actually go out there spacewalking. So we are going to put our spacesuits on.
Oh my gosh.
Be in the airlock. We're going to go outside. We're not going to be really in space. We'll still be out in space. We close these doors way up there, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to go out and we're going to actually, crank them shut. And even along the bulkhead, if there's not that, we want a really good seal there. So we actually practice spacewalking
far out
inside the space shuttle.
I mean, when I think about the mechanical engineering of these doors, they're like 60 or 70 feet long, or they're gigantic.
Exactly.
And they have huge temperature differentials. So mechanically, they're changing their shape out there.
Yes, and that's why there's really this chance that these things could happen.
Right.
When you shut the doors, they've been in it, and we think about, in fact, they actually will turn the orbiter in certain attitudes to achieve a good thermal environment. In fact, we'll cold soak the cabin.
Wow.
To make sure, I mean, that's two different things.
Yeah.
Cold soaking the cabin to really get that place cold in case we have a thermal problem coming home, right?
Fascinating.
But then there's the thermal on the doors, trying to make sure that they're in their best behavior.
Over that distance, it boggles my mind that it ever closes. I mean, one of the facts I love.
It's a system, like along, it's got latches along the bulkhead,
Yeah.
and then the last ones are along the center. Right?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. It's just amazing. So you never had to do that in space, though?
No.
Has anybody?
No.
Oh, good.
No.
Oh, good.
And as a person, I was assigned as a spacewalker on both of my shuttle missions, but with no planned spacewalk. But everybody wants a spacewalk.
Yeah.
And it's really not fair to hope for something like the doors, which is pretty life-threatening.
No.
But something like the antenna that we don't see it there, but right behind, like where the pilot sits there on this side, there's a TV antenna, a dish that we send out.
Right.
And if it won't come back in, then we can't shut the doors. And it's expensive to throw that away. So that is something that is reasonable to hope for. But the KU band antenna will not come back in, and you have to go out and rescue it.
Let's take a look at this logo. There's something I notice every time I come here, is that when I look at the Discovery logo up close, I can see that it was spray painted through a stencil.
How can you see that?
Well, because I can see on the D, I can see on the bottom of the vertical stroke of the D, I can see a little bit of overspray on the bottom and on the upper left part. Just enough to tell me.
Sloppy stencilers?
Just
is that what you're
tiny
saying?
bit of sloppy stenciling. And that warms my heart, because that just means it just is another solidification that people built this.
Well, and when I see it here, like in my mind, there's people crawling all over it. Because
Right.
when we would go in Houston to the orbiter processing facility, people are working on all different parts of it, and
At a feverish pace to get it ready.
if you meet them, whether it's in the cafeteria or someplace in town, and you ask them what they do, and people are so deservedly proud of being part of this, because astronauts don't come home without people making sure this happens on the ground,
Yeah.
and we don't get to go out there and see our universe either.
Amazing. Cady, I've been here half a dozen times to look at this, and you've easily doubled my enjoyment of it today. Thank you so much. Just amazing.
I love seeing it.
Oh. I never get tired of visiting the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. I always find something new to lock onto, and the tale on display of human ingenuity is always inspiring. If you'd like to get a better sense of what it's like to stand in front of a space shuttle or visit the Spacesuit Conservation Lab, we also filmed this in virtual reality as part of the Tested VR series. You can watch this right now, either through the Tested VR app or on MetaQuest TV. Links and instructions are in the description below. Thanks you guys for watching.